Glad to be.
Okay, so we're back in chapter 2, almost finished. Soon we'll be finished with chapter 2. Um, we finished this complicated business of brothers marrying or men marrying two sisters and the complications, because obviously a man cannot marry his sister-in-law, and so there's a way out of it. If there are two brothers, the first one can perform chalitza, and then the second brother can marry the others, or excuse me, the second man can marry the other sister, because there's no longer a problem of which wife was the married one, and the chalitza breaks the tie, and the second sister can be married to the second man if he chooses to do that. The next Mishnah, which is Mishnah 8, Chet, interesting, if there are more than one brother of the deceased, then the mitzvah, the commandment, really is of the oldest brother, oldest surviving brother, has the obligation to perform yibum, to marry the widow of his brother. But ve'im kadam hakatan, but if the younger brother marries the widow, zacha, he wins. He can stay married. It's a mitzvah for the eldest, but if a younger one does it, okay, done. Hanit'an al hashivcha v'nishtacharara. Okay, so hanit'an. This is an interesting word, translated here as one suspected by others. The root tet ayin resh is a interesting root. Excuse me, I'm sorry. In nun tet ayin, tet ayin resh, kayana. It's in Yiddish too. This particular word, very, very frequently used. If you have kindness, you have complaints against someone. To'ain is can be used in a technical judicial proceeding. A plaintiff is known as a to'ain. Here we have the nif'al, that's the nun, nit'an. And nit'an, one suspected, is translated as one suspected. That is, people consider, accuse him, to'ain, that he has had sex with a shifcha, with a Canaanite. Notice our translation adds the Canaanite, but not in bold. It just says shifcha, but here we're talking about a non-Jewish servant, v'nishtacharara, and then she is set free. Or, this man is suspected, again, the same beginning, al hanochrit. He's suspected of having sex with a nochrit, with a non-Jewish woman. V'nit, not a shivcha, but just a free woman, v'nit gaira. And then she is converted after they have sex. The Mishnah says, Harezeh lo yichnos. That man is not able to marry that woman, either the non-Jewish woman who converts or the non-Jewish maidservant who is freed. But the in kanas, if he does marry her, ein motzi'in miyado. The judges of the court don't remove them. In other words, he is not required to divorce her. If we distinguish between what in Hebrew is mitchila, what happens from the outset, or b'di avad. Usually people say b'di eved, but that's not a correct vocalization. It's b'di avad, something that already happened. If it happened, we just leave it alone. Then the Mishnah continues, Hanit'an al eshet ish. Now we have a man suspected of having a sexual relationship with a married woman. That's really bad. And the judges of the court, the judges of the court remove her, take her out from him. That is, that he is required to give her a get. Af al pi shekanas yotzi. In that case, even b'di avad, even after it happens, we don't allow it to continue. He must divorce her. So there is a distinction here. In the case of a unmarried woman, and the relationship is really inappropriate, but the slave or the non-Jew then becomes qualified to marry. That is, the Canaanite slave is free or the non-Jew converts, then we allow that marriage to take place. Ab initio, we say in Latin, from the beginning, that is mitechila, no, but b'di avad. But if it already occurred, we let the marriage stand. But in the case of a married Jewish woman who has an adulterous relationship, no, that marriage has to be ended. There is no possibility if b'di avad. Questions?
Are there restrictions on the men more so? What about the women as actors, so to speak?
No.
With whom they can relate. Are the women free to do whatever they want if they're single?
Yes, if they're single, if the woman is single, I wouldn't say they're free to do whatever they want, but the man is free to marry her. Again, the whole principle in this whole Seder, the whole Seder Nashim, is that the man is the actor and the woman is acted upon. And that's the problem that we're dealing with. And again, as I've mentioned before, the rabbis were very, very insistent on that principle, in contrast to Roman law, where the woman had equal standing with the man. And so we're faced in today's world where we consider this kind of a relationship is sexist and problematic, we have an issue in the Jewish community with how we're going to handle this. And it's an issue that divides. It's not a unifying issue. It's an issue that divides us. Obviously, in the Haredi community, in the ultra-Orthodox community, this is very much at the basis of the community. You've seen, I'm sure, on television and in movies and so forth, how this plays out. I'm not saying that those images are valid for what's happening, but it is characteristic of the Haredi community today that women and men are not equal. And they have a very specific role to play. And in the relationship, the man has the power. Steve, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the whole thing with Eshet Ish, because I don't think that we force people to get divorced in that circumstance.
That he had sex with an Eshet Ish?
Yeah, like the Mishnah says that someone has a relationship, illicit relationship with the Eshet Ish, and then he can't marry her. And if he does, we break it off. But I don't think tachlis, as they say, that we break it off.
Today, you mean?
Yeah.
You mean she's married to somebody else?
Yeah, and she gets divorced. She has an affair. Divorces her hated husband. She's not allowed to marry the new guy.
Gives her a get.
Yeah, the first husband gives her a get, and she marries the second guy.
And she marries the second guy, and that's permitted.
No, I think it's a sul.
Okay,
but we don't force them to break up.
So mitchila, it's asur, but with the avad, you're saying that today the rabbinate does not enforce this action.
Right.
Interesting. That is. I'm going to do a little more study in terms of a tshuva. I'm going to look for a tshuva. Let me write it down.
Okay, because I know that in the Israeli Rabbanut, if it's part of your divorce, if there's a claim of infidelity on part of the woman, again, it's not equal. Yes. That's substantiated in court as part of the divorce, then the Rabbanut won't let her marry the other guy. But
if it's
right, but this is not, the Mishnah is not talking about a substantiated court case. It's talking about if someone's suspected.
That's correct. It's not. It's only nit'an. It's only nit'an, suspected. Okay, I just wrote this down. Let me find out my friend and teacher, Rabbi Brand. Let me bring it to him, and we'll find the tshuva next week. Okay. I will share with you the reasoning to allow this marriage and not to force a divorce. The Mishnah, I think, is clear that, and it's distinguishing, as I read the Mishnah, it's making a clear distinction between the case of a convert or a freed maidservant where b'di'avad, where after it happens, we don't force a divorce, whereas with an adulterous relationship with or suspected of an adulterous relationship with a Jewish woman, we do not allow the marriage to continue. Yes, Nelson. Unmute, please. Yes.
Yeah. I have two small questions.
Okay.
Did I hear you say that the word suspected was commonly used in Yiddish?
No, not suspected, but the root tet ayin nun is a taina. Have to have a taina against someone is very common in Yiddish.
Now, about the divorce in front of the court, the suspicion, is this the process that's described in the Torah where she's given, in effect, a way of aborting, and if it works, she's convicted? Or is this just a legal proceeding?
I don't quite understand what you're asking.
Are you asking about sota?
Yes.
Okay, so this is not, sota relates to the woman, not to the man. Again, we see another example where if the man is suspected, it's one thing, but if the woman is suspected, that's a big deal.
But that's what the divorce is about. She's suspected of adultery.
If she is suspected of adultery, then the sota applies. Then the issue of the sota, and then that's
the granting of the divorce means that she lost the child.
No, why? Why do you say? Well,
That's
there's
the procedure in
no necessity for the child. The sota is administered if the husband suspects his wife of having an adulterous
relationship. But the divorce is granted if she loses the child, if it drops.
No, it's not a question of the child. It's there's no necessary pregnancy. We'll look at that text.
Hey, Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Are they still using that technique where the woman who might be suspected of infidelity has to drink a certain potion and there's something about Hashem's name dissolved? Are they still doing that?
Steve, do you know if in Israel they're enforcing the sota? Are you familiar with that?
No, nobody does anything with that.
I don't think so. But
I thought in order to do it, you had to sweep up some of the grounds in the temple. Then there's no temple to sweep up in.
Well, thank God we don't have a temple to worry about.
Maybe they should contrive something that's comparable to that technique, minus the temple, and use it as a test.
Well, that particular procedure is an example of something that is very, very common in the ancient Near East in terms of, if somebody can be thrown into a river, and if that person is not drowned, then he's innocent. If he drowns, that's a sign that he's guilty. That's a common, very, very common in ancient Near East law outside of the Bible. So in a certain sense, this sota thing is in other ancient Near East cultures would be quite common. My point that I want to make is that in the Torah, it's uncommon.
But that's supposing it's entirely that kind of magical thinking. But what if it really works? Isn't it in effect that if he thinks she's pregnant, he thinks she's cheated because she's pregnant?
Oh, no, not necessarily pregnant. Not necessarily pregnant. That's not a requirement for the sota, that she be pregnant. Only that he suspects that she's had sex with someone else. There's no need for pregnancy.
Mr. Period, I take it.
Not necessary for that either. Just that he suspects. That's all. That's all that's required. Suspicion.
Yeah,
No,
that she's been with he's given her warning. She goes off with a man into private, another man, and he warns her not to do it again, and she does it again anyway. Then he can take her to the temple for the procedure. And I think there's a reward listed in the Torah that if she turns out to be innocent, that she'll be rewarded with a child.
well, I think that's midrashic, but I don't think it's
Oh, it could be.
in
Could
the
be.
Torah. But this again, this procedure. I'm going to check for tshuva with regard to this, a contemporary tshuva, to see how the argument is made that we don't enforce this.
What would happen if she would refuse to go to be tested, so to speak? You've got to trust me. I'm speaking the truth. I'm not going to be tested.
I refuse to be vaccinated.
I'm afraid she doesn't have a choice. The rabbis could intervene and try and convince the husband that she's faithful, and that his suspicion is uncalled for. But we've talked about this before, that a woman should not be privately with a man other than her husband, together in a room. And I explained, that I learned when our daughter was married in Israel from the Orthodox rabbi who signed the papers so that it was an official wedding. Since I'm not recognized as a rabbi, he signed them, but he taught us that the purpose of a hotel lobby is for the potential groom to meet with the potential bride. Because if they're in the lobby, then they're not in a room by themselves. So they get a chance to meet each other and decide if they really want to get married. Usually there are 2 meetings or so before the agreement is made between the groom's parents and the bride's parents. And that's why if you go into hotels now in Jerusalem, for instance, I remember when Jean was there for a convention, and I didn't know this, but I saw all these Haredim, men and women, coming into the lobby and sitting down, and they have little alcoves around the lobby, and sitting in these and the man and the very young people, and they were talking with each other. So that's why we have lobbies in hotels in Israel. That's a joke. Okay.
They get a lot of use for that.
Yes, and you don't have to pay to use the lobby. You can, and you don't even have to get a cup of coffee. and nobody will bother you. Okay. The next Mishnah is very interesting in that it really relates to Gitin, of which there is an entire tractate later on in Seder Nashim, where we will learn this this procedure and this law and so forth again. So, Hamevi get mi medinat hayam. The divorce is brought from outside the land of Israel. Medinat hayam literally means a city or a country of the sea, that is, or overseas, but it refers to anywhere outside of the land of Israel. And the person bringing the get says, Befanai nichtav ubefanai nechtam. This get was written before me in my presence, and it was also signed in my presence. Such an agent who brings the get from overseas to the land of Israel and presents it to the wife may not marry that woman. Our translation explains, since the validity of the get, of the bill of divorce, is based upon his testimony, marrying the divorcee creates the impression that there's an alternative motive. In other words, that really he wants to marry this woman and he is acting as her first husband's agent to bring her a get so he can marry her. The agent, the shaliach, who is delivering the get from abroad, is relied upon when he says that befanai nichtav ubefanai nechtam. I saw it written and I saw it signed. That is a part, as we will see, when we get to the laws of Gitin. I've already said this, but we'll see it in detail, that the laws of Gitin are very, very strict. And the process, the whole process is very much regulated. And in the conservative movement, we follow to a letter all of these procedures. Now we're talking about a witness. A witness comes to the court and says, this woman's husband died. Or he testifies, I killed her husband. Or we killed her husband. Such a witness cannot marry this widow. Rabbi Judah limits this to say, if he says, I killed him, he can't marry her. But if he says, we killed him, then he can marry her. All of this is, of course, because, number one, we rely on the testimony of the witness that the man is no longer alive. His testimony is frees her to marry another man. It's the equivalent, really, of her getting a get. Which
What about David HaMelech and Bathsheba?
Oh, David HaMelech. David HaMelech, I know you're supposed to say nobody was more righteous than David HaMelech.
Oh, he's
But-
clearly not.
Clearly, from the text itself, he was really did lots and lots of bad things, as the prophet Nathan told him. He did not act according to this law at all, and in fact was guilty of adultery and all kinds of and in a certain sense of causing a murder, causing a death, sending Uriah to the front lines, and he was killed, and so forth. So no, don't take him as your example.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes,
This is probably a very broad question, but could be applied to what we're talking about now. This complex system of rules and regulations were designed or created by rabbis. Is there the assumption that Hashem they're doing everything they're doing is with Hashem's approval, and it was based upon perhaps hidden statements in the Torah that have influenced these decisions as to what you can do and what you can't do and so forth? Is that the assumption? Because
No,
the Torah is clearly
I
less
would-
specific, and
I would not say that. What I would say is that in these cases, what we're talking about is the rabbis using their intelligence and their judgment to set terms with regard to cases that come before them, based on their own understanding of the situation. If an agent whom we rely upon, it's coming from abroad, so we don't recognize any signatures. These are people who, the signatures of the witnesses on the get aren't helpful to the court that is giving the woman the freedom to marry somebody else. So we have to rely, in this case, notice it says brought the get from abroad. That's a crucial piece here. So the rabbis are using their intelligence and their judgment to determine that such an agent, since we're relying really on the agent's testimony, because we can't verify these signatures. We don't know who these people are. It's from abroad. But he says, I saw it written, I saw it signed. It's a valid get. Fine, okay. We're relying on his testimony. He can't then say, okay, now I want to marry her. He's just as the man who testifies, I killed him, I'm ready to marry his wife. We can't rely on that because maybe he's saying that so he can marry her, but he really didn't kill her. Again, we're relying on the validity of his testimony. We have no other basis to free that woman to marry another man. That's the crucial point here. And, in American law, if a man is, lost in war or whatever, after 7 years, that woman can marry. we assume the man was killed in war, not in Jewish law. In
You're
Jewish
saying
law, there's no limits.
these
That's why we have the problem of the aguna, of the woman who has no get. We have no proof that her first husband died. She is married to that man and cannot marry anyone else.
So all these rules and regulations you're saying, Rabbi, really are unrelated to divine mandates. These are strictly human decisions.
They are strictly human, but they are obviously based on the Torah. In that the Torah is very clear that a woman is not permitted to have sex outside of marriage, and that the bond of marriage can only be broken by the death of the husband or the delivery of a get. Those are the two ways that the woman can marry someone else. Lacking those two ways, she's married and cannot marry anyone else. And this is a big, big deal. And the rabbis are very much concerned that that this be done in a valid way, and there be no suspicion that this agent is really out to marry the woman, and he's trying to trick the court to allow him to marry this woman. So the agent from bringing a get from abroad cannot marry this woman, and a man testifying, notice we rely on one witness. Usually in Jewish law, you have to have two witnesses for any case. But in the case here of a husband, and the woman is married to him, and he's the only witness to his death, we rely on that, and we free her to marry someone else, but not him. Why not him? Says Rabbi Yehuda. It's too. He's suspected. He's suspected. If they say we killed him or he was killed by someone else, okay, one witness will do. But if I killed him, I killed her, he has an ulterior motive. And that's the only thing we can rely on to free her, is his testimony. Yes, Nelson.
I thought I saw, and you were scrolling pretty fast, that if he says we, she's free to marry anyone but them.
No. If he says we, then he can marry. We killed him. His wife may be married. Oh, the translation. You're right. The Hebrew doesn't say it. The translation says to anyone other than those witnesses. His wife may be married to anyone other than those witnesses. The Mishnah doesn't say that, but I think what the